hello everyone, and we welcome you to another episode of Securing Tomorrow, conversations that shape financial future. इसके पहले हमने जो लास्ट पॉडकास्ट शूट किया था सर, उसमें हमने NPS के बारे में जो intricacies थी वो डिस्कस करी थी, and today we are going to deep dive into subject that directly impacts the future of all public sector bank employees, all NPS subscribers, that is the retirement corpus. And before we dwell onto the topic, sir, I'll just take a minute and I'll inform कि ये जो choice of fund का option आया sir, it was hard earned by the virtue of signing of joint note with IBA on 8th of March 2024 between IBA and IWEBU and All India Bank Officers Confederation, which is the largest umbrella of supervisory trade union cadre, having more than 3.5 lakh officers under its umbrella. उसमें Federation of Bank of India is one of the strongest pillars, where we have more than 27,000 officers in our umbrella, and regularly we have ensured that we keep on working for the welfare of our staff members and bank employees. उसी में हमने ये choice of fund के लिए जो हमने काम किया, जो हमने मेहनत करी, उसी फलस्वरूप Bank of India became the first public sector bank in the entire banking space जिन्होंने ये ऑप्शन प्रोवाइड किया. उनका देखा देखी अगले 6-7 बैंकों ने भी ये ऑप्शन दिया, एंड ऑफ लेट रिसेंटली 9th of September 2025 DFS has issued a letter for the remaining public sector banks to provide an option for choice of fund to all its employees, and we are really thankful to DFS, to IBA that they gave this option to all its employees, because अपना रिटायरमेंट का फंड चूज करना, अपना कॉर्पस चूज करना या अपना कॉर्पस बिल्ड करना, इफ आई एम अलाउड टू से दैट, अपना कॉर्पस बिल्ड करने के लिए चॉइस ऑफ फंड एक बहुत प्रोग्रेसिव स्टेप रहा. एंड टू हेल्प अस अंडरस्टैंड विद द रिसेंट डेवलपमेंट्स इन NPS, वी आर रियली प्रिविलेज्ड एंड रियली honored that we have Sriram Iyer ji, who is the MD and CEO of HDFC Pension Fund, one of the most respected voices in the pension space. He has an extensive experience of close to 3 decades in pension funds, and he was recently recognized as one of the top 20 pension fund executives in Asia by the Asian Investor magazine. अगर हम HDFC pension fund का बात करें, पूरे हमारे NPS में there are 10 funds, out of which HDFC fund is one of the oldest pension funds, whose inception was on 1st of August 2013, and currently it governs an AUM of more than 64,726 crores, which is one of the highest in the industry. So, handing it over to Iyer ji, sir, we welcome you to the show, and it is really pleasure to have you over here.
Thank you very much नीरज जी, thank you for having me here. और सबसे पहले तो मैं आपको बधाई देना चाहता हूँ कि आपने इतना प्रोग्रेसिव कदम, जो आपने बताया, जिस तरह से आपने एक्सप्लेन किया कि बैंक ऑफ इंडिया के लिए पहले आपने ये कदम उठाया और फिर देखा देखी में और भी पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक, बिकॉज कई सारी जगह पे हमारी जब बात होती है तब ये निकलता है कि बैंक ऑफ इंडिया वाज द फर्स्ट टू ओपन अप द अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर its employees, and I must congratulate you and all the hard work that has happened, because it has taken a lot of hard work to convince, and for the right reasons, I think. And yes, I think it is very, very heartening to see that
definitely. And जब ये step, जब joint note sign हो रहा था between IB and IWEBU, it was a very progressive step, जिसके बदौलत आज हमारे लगभग 3 लाख बैंक एम्प्लॉइज, बिकॉज कुछ बैंक्स बचे हैं अभी जहाँ ये चॉइस ऑफ फंड नहीं है, लेकिन मोर देन 3-4 लाख एम्प्लॉइज के पास आज वो फ्रीडम है टू चूज देयर फंड, एंड इट हैज कम बाय वेरी हार्ड अर्न्ड स्ट्रगल, बाय नेगोशिएटिंग, एंड वी आर रियली थैंकफुल टू DFS कि उन्होंने वो हमको ऑप्शन चूज करने का प्रोवाइड किया, बिकॉज इट वाज ऑलरेडी प्रिवेलेंट इन अदर RRBs, other insurance companies, other public sector enterprises. So to extending it to public sector banks was a welcome step.
Excellent. And I must really tell you that this is a fantastic move. और ये इस कदम की वजह से जो है मुझे लगता है कि बहुत फ़ायदा होने वाला है पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंकर्स का, और मुझे लगता है कि ये जो फ्रीडम है, और ख़ास करके आपने जैसे बताया, मोस्ट पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंकर्स हु आर एन NPS, उनकी उम्र करीब 30, 35, 32 की जो है एवरेज उम्र है, उतनी उम्र है, तो उनके पास 25 साल है, 20, 25, 38, 28 साल है, जहाँ पे वो सही तरीके का एसेट एलोकेशन चूज करके अपना एक जो है जमा पूंजी रिटायरमेंट की जो अमाउंट है वो बहुत बेहतर बना सकते हैं, कॉर्पस बहुत बढ़िया बिल्ड कर सकते हैं. सो आई थिंक इट्स अ फैंटास्टिक डेवलपमेंट, एंड आई मस्ट once again congratulate you for this.
So let us start with fundamentals for listeners जो पहली बार सुन रहे हैं, उनके लिए हम मतलब ये सवाल हम पूछना चाहेंगे आपसे कि सर, what are the different classes available under NPS, and how can a common investor
जी।
जिसको ज़्यादा नॉलेज नहीं है, हाउ
जी।
कैन ही चूज द राइट मिक्स?
देखिए नीलेश जी, पहली बात तो ये है कि नेशनल पेंशन सिस्टम के अंदर 4 एसेट क्लासेस हैं। एसेट क्लासेस क्या है? एसेट क्लासेस ये है कि मतलब जिसके अंदर आपकी जो इन्वेस्टमेंट होती है और आपकी जो कंट्रीब्यूशन कहते हैं, जो आपकी जो सैलरी से कट के जो पैसा जा रहा है, वो अमाउंट जाता है 4 एसेट क्लासेस के अंदर। इसके अंदर इस एसेट क्लासेस कौन से हैं? एक तो इक्विटी हो गया, जैसे अपने स्टॉक मार्केट कहते हैं इसको, या इक्विटी कहते हैं। इक्विटी इज वन एसेट क्लास। दूसरा हो गया आपका कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड्स, राइट, जो बहुत अच्छी कंपनियां जो है वो जो बोरो करती हैं, जब बोरो करती हैं तब बॉन्ड इशू करती है। उस बॉन्ड्स को पेंशन फंड्स खरीदती हैं और वो उसकी जो इंटरेस्ट इनकम है, जो इंटरेस्ट इनकम कमाती है, राइट, और मेच्योरिटी पे वो जो पैसा जो हमने लेंड किया है वो वापस आ जाता है पेंशन फंड को। और तीसरा कैटेगरी है गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज, जो आई एम श्योर सबको पता है, फेमिलियर। गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटी सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की सिक्योरिटीज हो सकती है, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट की भी हो सकती है। तो दोनों कैटेगरी आती है, पर मेजॉरिटी ऑफ दी इन्वेस्टमेंट इन गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज वाला जो एसेट क्लास है उसके अंदर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज में जाता है, और 20-22% कई बार जो है स्टेट डेवलपमेंट SDL जो बोलते हैं, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज में भी जाता है। तो ये 3 एसेट क्लासेस हैं। चौथा एसेट क्लास जो है उसको बोलते हैं ऑल्टरनेट एसेट क्लास, जिसके अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा एलोकेशन आज की तारीख में नहीं होता है, क्योंकि उसके अंदर कुछ कंस्ट्रेंट्स हैं हमारे भी। तो इन 3 एसेट क्लासेस पे अगर हम फोकस करें तो बेहतर होगा, बिकॉज इक्विटी, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज, कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड, दीज आर द 3 ब्रॉड एसेट क्लासेस दैट सब्सक्राइबर्स मस्ट बी अवेयर ऑफ। एंड इसके अंदर इसकी जो मिश्रण होनी चाहिए, कितना किस में डालना है, वो जो है वो रिस्क अपनी खुद के रिस्क के ऊपर डिपेंड करता है, जो हम बाद में भी बात करेंगे इसके बारे में कि भाई कितना रिस्क एपेटाइट पे क्या लेना चाहिए। पर ब्रॉडली इक्विटी जो है उसके अंदर वॉलेटिलिटी ज़्यादा होती है शॉर्ट टर्म में, बट रिटर्न्स ज़्यादा बेहतर मिल सकता है उसके अंदर, क्योंकि लॉन्ग टर्म में रिटर्न उसमें बेहतर मिलने की संभावना है। गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज और कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड के अंदर आपको वॉलेटिलिटी, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज वॉलेटिलिटी हो सकता है, बट कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड के अंदर वॉलेटिलिटी नहीं होगी, मतलब ऊपर नीचे नहीं होगा, बट रिटर्न्स उसके अंदर जो है वो लिमिटेड रिटर्न्स मिलेंगे, कि फिक्स्ड इनकम है।
सर, इसी कड़ी में हम आगे आपसे पूछना चाहेंगे कि चॉइस एंड कस्टमाइजेशन जो है, जैसे कई बार बात की जाती है एक्टिव चॉइस, ऑटो चॉइस, एंड रिसेंटली जो एक बैलेंस्ड चॉइस NPS ने ऑप्शन अवेलेबल करके दिया है। एक सिंपल टर्म्स में कैन यू हेल्प आवर लिसनर्स डिसाइड व्हिच मोड वुड सूट बेस्ट देयर गोल्स? सर,
बहुत अच्छा सवाल है नीलेश जी। एक्टिव चॉइस का ये मतलब है कि आपके पास यू कैन एक्टिवली चूज कि आपको एसेट एलोकेशन आपको क्या मिश्रण बनाना है, आपको किस तरह की कॉम्बिनेशन बनानी है, आपको इक्विटी, कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड और गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज की, समझ रहे? तो आपके ऊपर चॉइस है। तो एक्टिव चॉइस इज चॉइस द सब्सक्राइबर मेक्स ऑफ डिफरेंट कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ एसेट क्लास। तो मैं ये कहूँगा कि जो सब्सक्राइबर को थोड़ी बहुत समझ है, अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि भाई इक्विटी क्या होता है, कॉर्पोरेट बॉन्ड क्या होता है, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटी क्या होता है, वो अपना खुद का एक कॉम्बिनेशन बना सकते हैं। दूसरा चॉइस होता है ऑटो चॉइस, जैसे नाम सजेस्ट करता है, वो ऑटोमेटिकली एसेट एलोकेशन, उसके अंदर एक डिफाइंड एसेट एलोकेशन है एज के बेसिस पे, और वो एसेट एलोकेशन जो है वो इक्विटी की तरफ एसेट एलोकेशन जो होता है 35 की उम्र से लेके 55 की उम्र तक इक्विटी एसेट एलोकेशन कम होता जाता है। वो क्यों कम होता है? क्योंकि वो वॉलेटिलिटी, इक्विटी जो एसेट क्लास है, एज यू गेट क्लोजर टू रिटायरमेंट, इक्विटी के अंदर आपकी एसेट एलोकेशन थोड़ी कम होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि वॉलेटिलिटी जो है फंड की कम होती है इक्विटी कम होने से। बट व्हेन यू आर यंगर, आपकी इक्विटी एलोकेशन ज़्यादा होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि उसमें पोटेंशियल फॉर रिटर्न्स इज मच हायर। तो ऑटो चॉइस ऑप्शन जो है वो मैं कहूँगा फिल इट, सेट इट, फॉरगेट इट वाला प्रोडक्ट है, जहाँ पे आप डालें और आप उसको अपने हिसाब से प्रोग्रेस करने दें। द बैलेंस लाइफ साइकिल फंड जो आपने लास्ट में कहा, वो एक रिसेंट इनोवेशन है। 2024 के अंदर जो है PFRD ने बैलेंस लाइफ साइकिल फंड भी लॉन्च किया, जहाँ पे मेरे हिसाब से इट इज अ वेरी वेरी सुपीरियर ऑप्शन, बिकॉज उसके अंदर टेपरिंग जो बोलते हैं, इक्विटी में जो एलोकेशन कम होता है वो 45 की उम्र से कम होता है इंस्टेड ऑफ 35 की उम्र से, बिकॉज 35 इज अ लिटिल अर्ली। तो 45 की उम्र से कम होता है, और 45 और 55 के बीच में जो है वो कम होके इट कम्स डाउन टू level of 35% in equity, which I think is a very healthy mix of equity, corporate bond and government securities, and it is much better designed for investors who don't want to, कि जिनको भाई अपने हिसाब से नहीं बनाना है, वो बना हुआ है।
ऑटो चॉइस में कमियां थी उसको रिफाइन करके
BLC जो बोलते हैं, बैलेंस लाइफ साइकिल फंड जो है उसको बनाया हुआ है। Absolutely.
So this really makes sense that for investment, the one's risk appetite and age profile is the key to get the best out of NPS.
Absolutely.
Moving ahead, looking at the choice, like we just said, that there is frequent talk about having an active choice, auto choice, and the recently introduced balanced choice under NPS. Sir, could you explain this in simple terms and help investors decide which mode best suits their goals.
Certainly, certainly. So, as the name suggests, an active choice is a choice where the investor can actively choose the asset allocation. So, that's what active choice means, right? So, if you are an investor in NPS or you're a subscriber in NPS and your money is going into NPS, you as a subscriber have the choice of deciding how much will go into equity, how much will go into corporate bonds, how much will go into government securities, and how much will go into alternate asset classes. So, you can make an exercise, a choice. There are certain broad conditions that are laid down, which is essentially that in equity you cannot have an allocation of more than 75% under the current schemes that are there, under the tier 1 scheme that we're referring to. You have a maximum allocation that you can make of 75% equity, and the remaining 25% can be between corporate bonds and government securities. You could also choose to be 100% in corporate bonds, you could be 100% in government securities, or you can have various other combination of asset allocation between these four asset classes. You can choose to be in an alternate asset class, or you can choose to not invest in alternate asset class as well. So the choice is entirely left to the subscriber. So that is essentially what is called as the active choice option, where the investor or the subscriber can actively choose the asset allocation across these four asset classes. The auto choice option, I like to call it as the fill it, set it, forget it scheme, right? Because it is ideally suited for individuals who are saying that, listen, I'm not an expert. I don't understand what this asset allocation really means. I don't know at what point of time I should be in what asset allocation. So the asset allocation in the auto choice scheme is automatically adjusted in such a way that as the individual progresses in age, the asset allocation towards equity keeps coming down, right? So the auto choice asset allocation is ideally suited for subscribers who are wanting to invest and then leave it there for the system to take care of asset allocation and therefore manage the risk in such a way that over the lifetime of the individual, the asset allocation is managed in such a way that as you approach closer to superannuation, your allocation to equity is low and therefore the volatility in your portfolio also reduces. I'll just talk about the balanced life cycle fund, which was introduced in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, 2024 or 2023. The balanced life cycle fund is in fact, in my opinion, the best suited amongst all the auto choice schemes, because the balanced life cycle fund actually addresses the drawback of the the so-called LC25, LC50, LC75, which are the auto choice schemes, by starting to taper the asset allocation from the age of 45 instead of 35, and it tapers till the age of 55. So the tapering of the asset allocation to equity starts from 45 instead of 35, which happens in the other three LC25, LC50, and LC75 schemes. The tapering of equity starts from the age of 35. Here it starts at the age of 45, right? So to that extent, I think there is a slight difference between the LC25, 50, 75 and the balanced life cycle scheme. The balanced life cycle scheme was launched, more recently after learnings from the fact that, the LC75, LC25 probably requires improvement. But there is a space for every kind of scheme, right? It's a function of what is the investor's risk appetite, and therefore all of these schemes could find a place in a customer's portfolio, and different people will choose different options.
So now let's talk about the performance of funds. So what kind of long-term returns does NPS generally offer, and how does the system handle market volatility, especially on the equity side?
Excellent question. So the first point that I would like to make is that out of the three asset classes, and let's leave aside alternate asset classes for now, because as I said, it's a very small portion of the overall asset allocation. It has certain constraints because of which that part of the asset allocation is very small, right? Firstly, you can only have up to 5% in alternate as an asset class. So we'll leave that aside for a moment because it is a smaller component. So if you look at equity, corporate bond and government securities, and corporate bond and government securities are generally referred to as fixed income. So if you were to talk about equity and fixed income, so if you look at equity as an asset class, the feature of equity is that it is a volatile asset class in the short term, but it is the only asset class that can potentially deliver double-digit inflation-beating returns in the long term.
Okay.
Right? Now, if you look at numbers, right, and we should always, when we talk about
returns,
we should talk about what has history taught us. So if you look at the history of indices, right, and let's just take market indices like Nifty, or for that matter, any of the indices, the top 100 or any of the indices that are available in the market. If you look at long-term study of returns from these indices, and if you look at what is referred to as a rolling return, I don't want to use jargon to sort of confuse people, but suffice to say that what does rolling return do? Rolling return is the return that is the experience of every single investor, by which I mean that irrespective of when you get in or when you get out, if you're able to capture the experience of all the investors, that is what is referred to as a rolling return, right? So if you want to look at rolling return of, so it is not a point-to-point return. So you can't choose a certain period and say from this date to this date the return is looking good, so therefore this is a good asset class. Or this date to this date that return is not looking good, therefore it's not a good asset class. So instead of doing that, look at what is called as a rolling return, which is to capture the every and defined time frames, right? 5-year rolling returns, 10-year rolling returns, and take different 10-year time horizons into account and see what is the return that is delivered. So if you look at equity as an asset class, typically, if you look at retirement as a goal, and NPS is a vehicle that is being used for retirement as a goal, right? More often than not, retirement as a goal ends up happening over 25 years, 30 years, 35 years. If an individual has joined the service at the age of 25, you have 35 years to go for your retirement goal, right? Yes. So when you have a 35-year journey to traverse, you need to look at what is the kind of behavior that asset classes demonstrate in the long term, in a 35-year time horizon. Now, while we may not have enough 35-year time horizons, but if you were to look at even 10-year time horizons or 15-year time horizons, right? And we at HDFC Pension keep looking at all of this data because we also have to communicate it to the investor. Because the perception that equity is risky is true if you're a trader. देखिए आप सुबह खरीद के शाम को बेचने वाले हैं. If you're going to buy in the morning and sell in the evening, then there is a risk, right? But if you're going to buy today and if you're going to hold on to it for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, the probability, and let me tell you, this is the number probability, then this is actual mathematics. So if you look at Nifty, which is the top 50 stocks in the National Stock Exchange, there is an index of 50 stocks. Yes. And this index is actually a passive index, right? Nobody is managing it, right? It's essentially a basket of stocks, the top 50 stocks. And that, of course, the stocks also keep changing depending upon the market capitalization and so on and so forth, right? So if you look at the behavior of Nifty 50, any 15-year time horizon, from the start of inception of the National Stock Exchange and the Nifty index, let's say in early 1990s, any 15-year time horizon that you take, you will see that it has never lost money. By which I mean that if you held on to Nifty for a 15-year time horizon, you would have never delivered a negative return. That's number one, right? So that gives you the comfort that if I hold on to a basket of securities for a long enough period of time, the probability of loss is zero. I'm using the word probability. Yeah. Right? Probability of loss is zero. The probability of you making more than 8% return is 100%. 100% of the time, at least this study of 15-year rolling return for the last, let's say, since inception, we looked at 15-year time horizons, and we looked at the return, and it said 85% of the time it actually delivers more than 12%. It has never delivered less than 8%, right? What does it tell us? It essentially tells us that equity as an asset class is, if you hold it for long enough periods of time, the risk of volatility actually goes away, right? Now, there are other risks that we will talk about, right? There's something called the sequence of return risk, which I will talk about slightly later. But if you look at equity as an asset class, it is the most ideally suited vehicle for creating retirement corpus, because this behaves in a manner, because equity, what is equity at the end of the day? You are lending money to an entrepreneur to run a business. Right? And the returns generated from the business comes back to you in the form of dividend and in the form of stock appreciation. Appreciation is in the value of the company, right? So that's what essentially, that's what equity is, right? So if you look at a basket of stocks, not just one stock, a basket of stocks, a basket of well-managed stocks, and I spoke about Nifty. So if this Nifty, as I said, is a passive index, right? Yes. If we as fund managers, what is our job? To manage the basket, which means that we have to study the stocks that are there, or study the stocks that are there in the universe of top 200 stocks that I told you about, which pension funds are allowed to invest in. We study, and based on our assessment, fundamental analysis of the sector, fundamental analysis of the stock, comfort on various things, DA parameters, governance, and so on and so forth. Based on that, we make choices of allocating money to those stocks, right? So even in a passive index, in passive basket like a Nifty, if that is the kind of probability, then the probability, and our job as a pension fund manager is to make sure that we are able to at least beat the index, right? BSE 200 total return index is the index against which the pension fund's equity portion is measured. And that's our objective. Our objective is to make sure that we are able to beat the equity BSE 200 TRI index, right? Long answer to a short question, but I wanted to make sure that this myth that equity is risky is addressed. I'm not saying that equity is not risky. All I'm saying is that it depends upon what's your time frame, right? In my opinion, actually, in the long term, debt is more risky, right? Because if you look at the history of fixed income over long periods of time, as economies grow, as economies prosper, as economies become more mature, cost of money keeps going down,
No.
right? Which
Time
means
value.
that which means that over a period of time, as the economy grows and matures, your fixed income rates will keep coming down.
Absolutely.
I started my banking career way back in 1996, right? When I remember a foreign bank which was rated AAA in its home country used to offer a rate of 14% here on NRO deposits. Right now, those are unheard of, right? I mean, 14%, if you think about it, you'll say it's probably an unsecured loan that you're lending, right? So things change, right? And today, if you look at the banking industry, I'm sure the general rates that are
Yes.
prevailing over a 3 or 5 year time horizon is probably 6, 7, 7.5%,
Yes.
8%, right?
Yes.
So to that extent, over a long period of time, if you want to create a portfolio which is inflation beating, you need equity in the portfolio. There has to be a fair portion of equity in the portfolio, and therefore the importance of equity in retirement planning cannot be understated. That's the point that I wanted to make. Now I'll quickly touch upon the government securities and the corporate bonds. Of course, in government securities and corporate government securities, there is no risk of default because those are sovereign securities, right? So the government is not going to default, right? Corporate bonds, there is an element of credit risk that you take, and then there's an element of what is called as the interest rates that we can talk about slightly later. But that's broadly the equity, corporate bond, government securities.
You spoke about busting the myth of equity and how risky it is. We'll just take a quick question on busting the myth regarding the government securities. Many people assume that government securities are completely risk-free.
Right.
Sir, are G-Secs truly risk-free, or is there some risk some investors should keep in mind?
Excellent question. I can't be more thankful to Nilesh than for asking this question, because this is a question that is so important to address, right? Because people intrinsically don't understand, and I don't fault them, right? So if there is something called a government security, then I cannot have a situation where you make negative returns on it. But I want to explain this to you in slightly more detail, right?
Yes, yes.
Now, when you're lending money to somebody, by assessing the credit profile of the individual. As a banker, I'm sure you do that,
Yes.
right? And I have done that at some point of time when I was a banker too. But so therefore, what are you trying to? And you quote a certain rate for a certain amount of time. You lend for a certain amount of time at a certain rate based on the risk of the counterparty, right? So that's what is called as the credit risk,
Credit risk.
right? But there is another risk in longer dated securities, which is called as the interest rate risk or the duration risk.
Duration risk.
Right? Now, what is an interest rate risk or a duration risk? Let's take a very simple example. Today, if we go out and buy let's say a security, which is let's say an FD, right? Not a security, let's say a corporate bond and an FD, where you're getting 6%, right? Let's say there is, for some reason, the interest rates in the market went up to 8%. What would happen to the security which I bought at 100 rupees at 6%? If the interest rates in the market went up to 8%, because let's say 3 months later, if the interest rate available to you is 8%, what would be the value of this 100 rupees security worth this 100 rupees? It is only paying me 6%.
6%.
For it to pay me 8%, the value will have to come down. 100 will have to probably come down to 95, right? So that the 6% on 95, 6 rupees on 95 is equivalent to 8%, right? I hope this is not too confusing, but essentially what I'm saying is that this is what is called as the interest rate risk, right? So a security which is a longer dated security, and typically government securities, and there are government securities or shorter dated securities, government securities are longer dated securities. There are 30-year government securities, 10-year government securities, and 20-year government securities. The risk of change in interest rate, the longer the duration of the security, the higher is the risk.
Yes.
Right? If the interest rates in the market goes up, the likelihood that longer dated securities will be more affected is higher, right?
Absolutely.
The shorter, because intuitively, if you're holding a security which is going to mature next year, even if the market rates have gone up, you're only affected for the next 1 year, right? But if you're holding on to a security which is 20 years, and if the interest rates in the markets have gone up, you are consigned to hold the security for the next 20 years. Therefore, it is going to get more affected, and therefore the price of that security will come down. Now, how does return happen, and how do you generate return in government securities? One is there is a coupon.
Yeah.
The coupon that the government says it's 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, depending upon the coupon that is there on the security and your purchase price, you are able to derive a certain coupon. The second is the capital appreciation or depreciation that happens. Based on this interest rate movement, the value of the security will go up or down, right? the longer the maturity of the paper, the higher will be the volatility, right? And therefore, the NAV movement, the NAV movement is a combination of two things. Accrued coupon, which is the coupon that the government will pay you because it is borrowed money from you, so they pay you, so therefore you make some money from that, and the impact of interest rates. If the interest rates have gone up, and if your security is longer term, you will lose, the value will come down, and therefore that's the combined value. So therefore, just to make sure that investors understand this well, I would like to say that government securities are risk-free from a credit perspective, which means that the government will never default on its payment of coupon, right? That's the expectation. That's the expectation, right? And that's how it has been. Indian government has never defaulted on payment of its coupon. Other governments have, right? A lot of European governments have actually defaulted, but Indian government has never defaulted, right? So to that extent, we have a pristine, credit history of credit worthiness of the Indian government, right? But because you're holding a security which is longer dated, market forces could determine the up and down, the price movement of the security. That could cause a loss for you. So it is possible that if you hold a long dated government security, by the way, NPS funds do hold long dated government securities because of the fact that investors put in money for the retirement, right? So we have access to capital which is 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So you may have a situation where over a 6-month time horizon, if there's a very sharp change in the interest rates in the market, you could see a negative on your GSEC as well. Yes, it is absolutely possible, right? So that I hope explains. I hope I didn't use too much of mathematics to confuse your viewers.
That was the perception that when government securities are there, they would definitely yield some returns. But because of holding them for long,
if the security is very long,
it can erode your...
If it is a long-dated security, change of interest rate in the market can lead to the price of the security varying, and that could cause this kind of an issue, right? Similarly, you could also gain significantly, right? If there is a reduction in the interest rate, right? And if you're holding on to a security which is yielding you 7% and the market rates have come down to 5%, the value of your security is going to go up, right? So therefore, your gains on, that longer-dated securities could be higher, right? But I want to just make one final closing comment on GSEC because we're talking about GSEC, is that if you hold it to maturity, right, then you run no risk because it's just optical, right? What you're seeing in the interim, let's say you bought a 30-year paper, right? And you bought the paper and there is an interest rate, movement in the market interest rates have gone up. Optically, the value of your security has come down. We spoke about it, right? But if your objective is that you want to hold on to the security till maturity, then it doesn't matter, right? Because you bought the security for one, you bought the security because you want it to come back to you. The maturity proceeds to come back to you at the end of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And what you're enjoying along the way is coupons. So there is no risk of credit risk or default at all with the government security, right? So, I would urge investors not to get too spooked, even if they see a negative return in a GSEC. In NPS, this can happen because NPS fund managers hold longer dated government securities because we have monies for the long term.
Yes.
And if you're able to see that there is a 7.1, 7.2, 7.3% kind of rate that we're able to get, we will participate in that. And there could be the market could move in the meantime and interest rates could go up and this could optically show a negative. But I don't think you should get worried, right? Because these are securities that you hold to maturity.
So thank you for clearing that myth. Now, let us just deep dive across for public sector bankers. As a prudent person in pension schemes, sir, what advice would you give across the age groups? Because हमारे पास public sector banks में, sir, we have an employee right from a 25-year-old to even 50-55-year-old. So, sir, आपके हिसाब से किसी को भी कितना इन्वेस्टमेंट करने के लिए भी what should be his allocation, and at the same time at what intervals he should rebalance or review his portfolio, sir?
Good question. Again, Nilesh ji, इसमें क्या है कि दो चीजें हैं, right? एक तो ये होता है कि हर एक इंडिविजुअल की अपनी रिस्क एपिटाइट होती है. Some individuals are such that they don't get too disturbed even if they see that the value has gone down temporarily. ऊपर चला गया, बहुत ज़्यादा एक्साइट नहीं होते हैं, नीचे आ गया तो बहुत ज़्यादा डिप्रेस नहीं होते हैं. और एनपीएस ऐसी चीज़ है जिसके अंदर मेरा मानना ये है कि सिंस इट गेट्स डिडक्टेड प्री सैलरी, बराबर है ना. हमारे साथ क्या होता है कि हमारी सैलरी कट के एनपीएस में इन्वेस्ट होने पैसा कट जाता है एनपीएस का, उसके बाद हमारे हाथ में आता है, राइट? सो मोर ऑफन देन नॉट व्हेन दैट हैपेंस, you don't keep always looking at the NPS balance. Of course, some people do look at it every 3 months, every 6 months, every month also some of them look at it. But I am a big fan of saying that this is a product where you should give it time, right? These are, see, मतलब Rome was not built in a day कहते हैं ना,
सही बात,
right? So similarly, if you want to build a retirement corpus which is meaningful, you should not interfere in the compounding journey, right? Now, to your question कि भाई किस उम्र में क्या एसेट एलोकेशन होना चाहिए, मैं आपको ब्रॉड गाइडलाइन दूंगा क्योंकि हर इंडिविजुअल के लिए एप्लीकेबल शायद
रिस्क एपेटाइट अलग-अलग
हो सकता है कि आप कम उम्र के हैं पर आपकी रिस्क एपेटाइट कम हो सकता है बिकॉज ऑफ वेरियस रीजन. देखिए रिस्क एपेटाइट होता क्या है, आवर बिहेवियर टुवर्ड्स अ सर्टेन इवेंट, दैट्स व्हाट रिस्क एपेटाइट इज, राइट? एंड माय बिहेवियर टुवर्ड्स दैट इवेंट मे बी डिटरमाइंड बाय वेरियस थिंग्स. मेरी जिंदगी में क्या क्या चीजें हिस्ट्री हुई है वो हर एक की अलग होती है, राइट? किसी की मान लीजिए किसी ने एक्सपीरियंस किया हो कि यार बहुत लॉस हुआ है और बहुत मान लीजिए फैमिली में कोई बिजनेस में बहुत लॉस हुआ है तो उसकी रिस्क एपेटाइट शायद कम हो गई हो, और किसी और का कुछ और हो सकता है एक्सपीरियंस कि नहीं भाई रिस्क लेने से ही पैसा बनता है तो रिस्क लेना ही चाहिए. तो अलग अलग लोगों की अलग अलग प्रक्रिया इसके ऊपर टेक है. पर मेरा ये मानना है इन जनरल, राइट, द यंगर यू आर द हायर शुड बी योर एसेट एलोकेशन टुवर्ड्स इक्विटी, राइट? The reason is very simple. हमने इसके पहले बात करी कि longer you hold on to equity as an asset class, the probability of you making inflation beating returns is higher, right? ये हमने पहले बात किया इसके बारे में, जो 15-year rolling return की बात करी हमने, सब बात करी. What does it say? It tells you that if you have a long time horizon, which is let's say 25, 30, 35, मैं तो कहूँगा 40, 45 भी कहूँगा मैं तो, right? ये अगर आपके पास 10 से 15 साल का टाइम है to retirement, there is a very high likelihood that you will make inflation beating returns. There is no guarantee in this, right? Equity is an asset class, is subject to the vagaries of volatility, right? But history suggests that the longer you hold on to a basket of equity stocks, higher is your experience. आप देखिए म्यूचुअल फंड की दुनिया में अगर आप देखेंगे कई सारे म्यूचुअल फंड्स बताते हैं कि भाई अगर जिस आदमी ने 1995 में हमारे साथ जर्नी शुरू करी होती उसने 22% कंपाउंडेड रिटर्न कमाया होता. पर रियलिटी ये है कि ये जो प्रोडक्ट्स हैं जिसके अंदर एंट्री और एग्जिट की कोई रोक टोक नहीं है, वहां पे इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोडक्ट ने तो डिलीवर किया रिटर्न, पर इन्वेस्टर ने एक्सपीरियंस नहीं किया है, क्योंकि आदमी अंदर बाहर करता रहता है क्योंकि आवाज इतना नॉइस है हमारे इंडस्ट्री में. मतलब इन जनरल देयर इज सो मच ऑफ नॉइस. अरे आज मार्केट बहुत गर्म है, आज मार्केट बहुत तेज है, अरे ये हो गया वो हो गया, देयर आर सो मेनी डिस्ट्रैक्शंस दैट हैपन कॉन्स्टेंटली. यू आर हियरिंग वॉइसेस ऑन द टीवी टेलिंग यू कि भाई आज मार्केट बहुत तेजी में है, आज मार्केट मंदी में है, अभी अच्छा गलत, अभी सही टाइम है, अभी कल कुछ हो जाने वाला है. If you look at all of those things in the long term, the longer you 10-year 15-year time horizon, ऐसा हुआ नहीं है कि आपको 9, 10, 11% से नीचे कभी रिटर्न कंपाउंडेड बना हो, राइट? So I would say, as a general rule, I would be in favor of individuals holding a larger asset allocation to equity. Now, whether you want to hold 60%, 70%, 75% is up to you. But I would recommend a higher allocation to equity at younger ages. As you get closer to, what is the risk of equity? Right? हम ये अगर सोचें कि भाई 55 की उम्र में आपके पास 5 साल है मान लीजिए रिटायरमेंट के लिए, ठीक है ना? तो उस टाइम पे आपको नए सिरे से आपको घुसना चाहिए इक्विटी में, मैक्सिमाइज करना चाहिए एलोकेशन, कर सकते हैं आप, बिकॉज 60 की कोई सीमा नहीं है. एक्चुअली देखने जाए तो 60 की सीमा नहीं है. एनपीएस आप 70 तक होल्ड कर सकते, 75 तक होल्ड कर सकते हैं, ठीक है ना? तो ऐसा कोई कंपल्शन नहीं है कि आपको 60 की उम्र में आपको निकलना ही है, बट हो सकता है कि आपको जरूरत हो, राइट? दैट यू मे नीड दैट. हाँ, शायद आपको जरूरत हो तो आपको निकालना है. तो देन यू नीड टू think about the fact that in a 5-year time horizon, the probability of a double-digit return probably drops from, let's say, 60, 65, 70% to probably 50%. So you're taking a larger risk. The risk of not being able to make double-digit returns, the risk of probably losing capital, there may probably be an 8-10% probability that you may probably lose capital, right? So therefore, if your age profile, and I think the other thing that I would like to also highlight is that all of us tend to look at NPS as दी बास्केट एंड से इसके अंदर हमारा एसेट एलोकेशन क्या होना चाहिए. मेरा ये मानना है कि हर इंसान के पास अलग अलग बकेट्स होती हैं. एक होता है आपका एनपीएस, एक होता है आपका म्यूचुअल फंड्स, फिर होता है आपका इंश्योरेंस, फिर होता है आपका फिक्स डिपॉजिट, फिर होता है आपका कॉर्पोरेट एफडी में भी कई लोग डालते हैं. तो ये जो चीज़ है ना, इसकी एक मिश्रण है. आप अगर देखें पोर्टफोलियो के अंदर अलग अलग चीजें हैं. सो ऑलवेज लुक एट एसेट एलोकेशन एट अ पोर्टफोलियो लेवल. तो वो गलती हम कई बार क्या करते हैं कि एनपीएस के अंदर मेरा एसेट एलोकेशन क्या है, वो इंपॉर्टेंट है, बट एनपीएस इज नॉट द ओनली vehicle that you have. You have other vehicles. So look at the asset allocation on an overall basis. If you have a larger portfolio where there is a large amount of fixed income allocation in the remaining portfolio, then by all means you can take higher, risk in the equity, irrespective of the age that you're at, right?
Yes.
But as I said, each person, each different strokes for different folks बोलते हैं ना कि मतलब हर आदमी की अपनी एक एपेटाइट होती है. तो in general, the closer you are to retirement, thumb rule, yeah, you're right. The closer you are to retirement, your allocation to equity should be low because it gets volatile, right? If your holding period is 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you may not be able to stomach the volatility. When you want the money at that point of time, probably the market is
at least 10-15 years जिसके पास हो,
10-15 साल अगर है आपके पास, तो आप बेशक maximize नहीं कहूँगा, optimize कहूँगा.
Optimize.
Right? Somebody may have a 60-65%, which is very, very good. Right? 60-65% allocation to equity is a very good allocation to equity. Right? Because आप देखें, if you look at equity, if you assume that it delivers a 12% return basket or a 15-year time horizon, fixed income, if you have to assume it will deliver 6% return, आप देखिए 75%, 12% will be delivered on 75% of the portfolio, which is roughly 9%. Right? And the remaining 25% of the portfolio will deliver you around the 1.5%, अगर 6% हो गया, right? तो आपको ब्लेंडेड रिटर्न करीब 10-10.5% का आ सकता है इसके अंदर, राइट? सो आई थिंक दैट्स द थंब रूल. यंगर यू आर, हायर शुड बी द एलोकेशन टू इक्विटी, एंड फिल इट, सेट इट, फॉरगेट इट. बहुत ज्यादा इसके ऊपर आप जो है
बार-बार उसको चेक करने से
जरूरत ही नहीं है.
यू शुड नॉट इंटरफेयर इनटू द
कंपाउंडिंग. आपका फंड
compounding.
मैनेजर आपके लिए काम कर रहा है ना, आप फंड मैनेजर के हवाले आपने सौंपा है, तो उसको अपना काम करने दीजिए, right? People are, and all the fund managers in the industry, I think they all come with tremendous amount of experience, right? And they are paid to do this, right? So you must, and it is the cheapest product. Of course, you don't get paid enough to do it, but the reality is that it's a very, very effective way of managing money. And more importantly, आप देखिए, this is probably very unique, where there is a entity called NPS Trust, National Pension System Trust. वो ट्रस्ट जो है, it oversees the functioning and the fund management activity of a fund manager. PFRD and NPS Trust, both of them supervise us. Every quarter, we are reviewed. Our performance is reviewed by the PFRD and by the NPS Trust. So there is somebody who is also overseeing the functioning of the fund manager. So the fund manager can't do anything and get away.
They are like the watchdogs.
They are in some sense the watchdogs. But I must tell you that both these entities obviously do not interfere in the business of fund management. That's a task left to the fund manager. But they evaluate how the fund has been managed in the last quarter, last 6 months, last 1 year, and make sure that they give us suggestions, right? And of course, they have defined a broad guideline कि इसके अंतर्गत आपको manage करना चाहिए. They have to of course ensure that we are within that broad framework that they have defined, but they also track what we do, and they, this review happens every quarter, which is very unique. And therefore, I would say, subscriber को बहुत ज़्यादा जो है
interfere बार-बार करने की जरूरत नहीं. They should have faith and trust.
हाँ, और देखिए लॉन्ग टर्म में आपने बहुत सारे स्कीम्स देखे होंगे, म्यूचुअल फंड्स की स्कीम भी आप देखेंगे. देयर इज अ साइक्लिकलिटी टू दिस बिजनेस, राइट? एनी इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोडक्ट, especially a product such as this equity, will go through cycles, right? So there will be a fund manager who will do very well for 3 years, and probably for the next 2 years the fund may not do well. Some calls that the fund manager took may not have worked out. देखिए, fund manager does things with the right intent of delivering returns on behalf of the subscriber, beating the benchmark. That's the objective of the fund manager, right? But ऐसा हो सकता है that some calls that the fund manager took may not play out in the short term. Right? And that, I think we must give them the benefit of doubt, and over a longer period of time, these things even out, right? And
average
returns do get delivered. So therefore, I think patience is a big virtue. Yes. Very, very big virtue.
सर, हमने इकोनॉमी की बात की, इंडस्ट्री की बात की. Let us take one moment outside NPS and just we need to understand from you, how do you view India's economic outlook over the next few years, and is our stock market overvalued, or the fundamentals still support the growth story, sir?
देखिए, at a point in time, there will always be a perception that we will have, right? But as NPS pension fund managers, our outlook is longer term, right? 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year. If you look at that kind of a time frame, I don't think there is any economy which is comparable to India in terms of its prospects, right? And I will tell you, I'll give you a few. One of the biggest pluses that India has is that we have a strong domestic consumption story.
Yes,
right?
Because of the population.
Because of the population is also getting richer, right? While it may appear that the rich are getting very richer, which is true, right? Which happens in every economy. But we must also acknowledge that in India, there is a very large number of people who are now out of poverty. Right? The pace of growth that we've seen, roughly 6.8% is the estimate for this year, 6.5, 6.8%. That's the range that is the estimate for this year. That kind of growth at a 4.3 trillion, 4.4 trillion kind of an economy size is something that cannot be dismissed, right? The reality is that our domestic consumption story is very strong. Governance standards in Indian companies have improved dramatically. If you look at the last 20, 25, 30 years, governance standards have improved. Government has introduced a number of things, number of standards. For example, we spoke about the IBC earlier, right? The influence in the banking code, right? Similarly, the government has taken numerous steps, various steps to promote manufacturing, various steps to promote all kinds of, India exports now the maximum number of iPhones, from any country, right? So there are a lot of things that are working. And I think the biggest advantage that we have is that we have a very large pool of consumers in India, right? And that is of course growing slower than what we would want it to grow, but it is definitely growing.
In comparison to other countries, it is definitely
growing. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. So I think if you look at it from a 15-20 year time horizon, without getting too much into details of every sector, my general comment is that you can't be better placed than in a country like India. And you see, of course, there will be the foreign portfolio investors will come in and go out, right? I mean, they will look at various geographies and they will allocate strategically. I don't think we should get distracted by that. In India, we are here, we see the growth that is happening, right? We see the development that's happening in terms of various sectors where investments are happening. And I think we are very, very optimistic, right? And we are very optimistic that India will continue to do very, very well for the next few decades at least, right? And we have 2047, which is the 100th anniversary of our, Viksit Bharat by 2047, which is the government's vision. I see no reason why, we should be. The short term things will always be short term, things that will come in. There will be some global factors that will pay. But I think we need to be. We've seen enough and more, right? Global financial crisis, they come.
2008.
So many things we've seen, right? 2001 to .com bust and all that. But if you look at a 25-year time horizon, 30-year time horizon, will eventually.
The stock market has delivered.
Yes,
at least
it will, right?
Sir, आपने exports की बात करी, global factors की बात करी. Just I would like your take on in the global context, sir. How do you think about the US tariffs and changing Federal Reserve policies, and how do these global factors affect India's long-term investment climate and especially the NPS portfolios?
Firstly, we are allowed as NPS fund managers to only invest in India. Therefore, our focus is only on Indian companies. At some point of time, we may probably be given the leeway to invest globally as well, at which point of time we will have to develop expertise to be able to study global stocks and indices and so on and so forth. But if you look at India's economy and we spoke about the fact that domestic consumption theme in India is very strong, right? Which in itself, in my opinion, is a strong moat when it comes to such, for example, the tariff war that's been going on in some sense, triggered by various policies of the government in the US, which they're doing for their own, they have good reasons for doing what they're doing. They have a certain view which is playing out. I think from our perspective, we need to look at how much are we going to be affected, right? There are certain segments of the industry that will be affected. For example, gems and jewelry, right? There's close to $12 billion of exports that happen from India to the US, right? So there are certain segments in the market that will get impacted, right? But what we must also keep in mind is, one is the domestic story. The second is that there are other economies. If you look at Southeast Asia, or if you look at Europe, or if you look at other African nations, right? These are emerging as large consumers of markets for India, right? And I think the Indian government has obviously been working and making sure that we're able to create. But we must not dismiss the fact that US is a very large, it's the largest economy in the world. It's got a very large consuming class. So we must definitely, and I'm sure the trade talks that are currently on will lead to an outcome which is more favorable. So there could be some short-term disruptions, but will this have a long-term impact on India's economy and therefore the implication for NPS fund managers and the NPS subscribers' monies? I don't think it's going to have a very. There might be some short-term impact,
disruption,
but I don't think we need to get too worried about some of these things. This will get sorted out.
So thank you very much, sir, because that is one point जहाँ सब लोगों को बहुत ज़्यादा डर भी है because of returns पे. You spoke about the government reforms, and we are really privileged that you have been into various forums where you are aware about the latest government reforms which are coming up in NPS, and really the policy development team that is there, they are making various changes. Sir, we are really privileged that you are over here today, and we have heard about you through print media and others, where you have always been a part of discussions where the latest government reforms in NPS have been discussed. Sir, we would request you to throw some light onto the new changes that are going to be incorporated into NPS, like the multiple scheme framework, which allows non-government NPS subscribers to invest up to 100% in equities. And what would be your take onto it, sir?
Excellent. I think it's been a very, very progressive move that's been made by the regulator PFRD under the chairmanship of Mr. Sriram, who took over the position of chairmanship in the month of June. There are a series of reforms that has been enriched over the last that have been actually built up over the last few months, and then was announced on the 1st of October, which is the International Day of the Older Persons, and NPS Divas as it is called, right? So in India we celebrate it as NPS Divas. So on NPS Divas, the multiple scheme framework, as you referred to, was unveiled to people at large. There are broadly three things that I want to talk about when it comes to multiple scheme frameworks. What is multiple scheme frameworks? It is a set of schemes that are available to non-government subscribers. Is it available to bank employees? Yes, because they are non-government sector. It is so. Non-government sector has now been given the opportunity to hold more than one schemes.
Okay.
Right? So at this point of time, in the earlier architecture, if you invested in an active choice scheme, let's say आपने 75-25 invest करा, so you had the choice of only holding that one scheme, right? In the multiple scheme framework, the subscriber is being given the choice to hold multiple schemes. So you could hold LC75 of a particular fund, and you could hold LC25 of another fund, right? But more importantly, pension funds have now been given the freedom to launch their own schemes.
That's right.
And within that, the pension fund can actually launch a scheme where 100% allocation to equity is permitted. Unlike in the older schemes where 75% allocation से ज़्यादा आप equity में नहीं ले सकते थे, in these new schemes, pension funds can launch. For example, HDFC Pension has launched a scheme called the Equity Advantage Fund, where 100% of the allocation, up to 100% of the allocation, can go to equity, right? So that's the second flexibility. The first flexibility is individuals can hold multiple schemes. Second flexibility is that pension funds can now launch schemes of different combinations. Asset allocation combination where up to 100% can be in equity. The third important change is that in the case of, in the multiple scheme framework, the vesting period is being reduced to 15 years. Which means that if you get into a particular fund under the multiple scheme framework, you actually potentially can get out at the end of 15 years. You have the option of getting out at the end of 15 years, right? Or 60, whichever is earlier, right? So those are the three broad changes that have happened. I think that it is definitely going to rejuvenate the industry because it gives a lot more choices to subscribers. Across pension funds, there will be different kinds of schemes that will be launched. You can actually pick and choose which kind of a scheme that you would want and what is the combination that you would want to hold of different schemes, and thereby optimize your returns over the long term.
The best of the schemes, फिर उसके ऊपर भी जैसा जिसका age है, they can invest up to 100% into equity also.
Yes.
And the best part, as a public sector banker, they come under individual
non-government sector. So to that extent,
so they can definitely invest.
See, currently the CRA systems are still in the process of getting reset. Right now, only the portion that you voluntarily invest outside of a corporate NPS contribution is going towards multiple scheme framework. But it's a matter of a few days when the CRA systems will be will be ready
It's
to
a
accept.
technical thing.
Yeah, it's
and
more a technical and initiative.
say, it's a matter of time that things
Things will be made available. Yes, that's correct.
Sir, आपने NPS framework के बारे में बात करी. Sir, how do you see the introduction of UPS, the Unified Pension Scheme, with an option for government employees to switch one time to NPS? Could you share your thoughts on how this might affect participation or confidence in the pension ecosystem overall, sir?
देखिए, if you look at the overall assets under management in NPS, and if you look at the number of subscribers in NPS, आप देखेंगे गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉइज जो हैं उसमें से करीब 26 लाख सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉइज है जिनके लिए यूपीएस आज की तारीख में अवेलेबल है. ठीक है ना. 63 लाख 65 lakh state government employees continue to be on NPS. Some state governments may choose to go to the UPS, but by the way, UPS is also a subset of NPS, right?
Yeah,
ultimately,
I wanted to clear that only,
yes,
because
UPS is a subset of NPS, right? UPS is also administered by the Pension Fund and Regulatory Development Authority, right? What is the difference? The difference is that in UPS, the government, which is the employer, central government, which is the employer, has given a mandate saying that, okay, what we are going to assure you is the pension after superannuation, subject to certain conditions, right? Subject to you having served for a certain number of years and so on and so forth. Based on those conditions being met, your pension is being assured, right? Now, that was something that the government has done, because the government is the employer, it has done it based on its own reading of what it wants. The
social security.
The sense of security that they would want to give to central government employees. And that's a thought through move by the central government, right? As a structure, I think it is a brilliant structure. We need to therefore also think about how can we create similar structures for the private citizens, right? Because somebody has to take care of somebody needs to think about how do we do this guaranteeing of the pension and also take care of some level of inflation adjusting.
Yes.
I must tell you that PFRD has been actually looking at various options. In fact, there are 3 consultation papers that are currently out, and we as pension funds are studying it, seeing what are the options that we can create. It is not just an accumulation journey, but we are also talking about how can we participate in the deaccumulation journey, right? Which is at the time of superannuation, can we do certain things which will help where we are able to give visibility to the individual of what is the kind of pension that they can potentially get, right? So to that extent, I think UPS structurally is very good in terms of the way it has been structured, and also the various changes that have happened over the last few months.
Fine-tuning that has happened.
Right, fine-tuning that has happened. I think the government has also been very receptive to feedback. Having said that, I think individuals will have to take their own calls, and we are seeing that people who have been in NPS for a long period of time, they may probably be very happy with the kind of returns that they've seen in NPS. And they may want to continue to, exercise the choice of remaining in NPS. So the government has extended the deadline for this to November 30th, and they may probably extend it beyond that. We don't know. That's for the government to take a call. But I think again it is an individual's choice. UPS as a product, essentially UPS as an option under NPS offers the individual certain sense of security from a pension perspective, right? That's the big difference between NPS and UPS. And in NPS, of course, you have the option to participate and make sure that you're able to manage your own pensions at that point of time and manage the accumulation journey as well in a different way.
Sir, let us just turn the spotlight towards HDFC Pension Fund. So could you tell our listeners what differentiates HDFC's approach to pension fund management and why investors should trust HDFC with their long-term retirement corpus?
Thank you. So HDFC Pension Fund, as you pointed out earlier, we started in 2013. So we are amongst the oldest pension fund managers that are there in the industry. HDFC as a brand has presence across various sectors in the financial services space, be it life insurance, which is the parent company of HDFC Pension, be it general insurance, which is a joint venture with Ergo, the bank, which is amongst the top 5 banks globally also in terms of market capitalization. So HDFC as a group has a very long history of
rich legacy
of taking care of customers' interest. If you look at HDFC Limited, it started the home loan business way back in 1976, when the concept of home loan itself was fairly underappreciated, right? So in India, in some sense, HDFC Limited built the whole helped build so many homes, including mine at some point of time, right? So I think HDFC has a very rich legacy. Most importantly, I think HDFC as a group takes governance very, very seriously, which means that at every point of time, we are very, very clear that we will do things, whatever is permitted, not just in letter but in spirit as well, right? We will adhere to the laws of the land in letter and spirit, and we've demonstrated that over these last many decades that we've been in existence as a group. From a pension fund perspective, as I said, we've been in existence since 2013. August 1, 2013 is when our first NAV got published. If you look at the returns that the funds have delivered, I would not claim that at any point of time the returns would be the highest. What we need to look at is, one, are you comfortable with the brand that you're working with? Does HDFC give you comfort? I hope it does give comfort to a large number of your audience. The second thing that you need to look at is what has been the performance, right? And if you look at performance of equity, corporate bond, and government securities, we have been either number one or number two if you look at it from a long-term perspective. And I would urge your listeners and the audience to look at long-term performance of asset classes like equity, because short-term performance can be distracting. And full credit to every player in the pension fund industry. I'm not trying to take away credit from anybody, but I would like to think that when it comes to a 25-30-year journey, you want to partner with a name that you're comfortable with, which has demonstrated performance, which has demonstrated resilience, which has demonstrated significant investment in this business. By the way, we have over 350 people in the pension fund company, and we are probably the largest when it comes to the number of people that are there. So we have made significant investments. Our investment committee, our board is a very, very respected, consists of a very respected set of people. And I am very happy to share with you that my investments team is also a very, very capable team. We have a very strong front office team and a back office team to make sure that the whole investment management happens very efficiently. So I would urge your investors to look at us very closely, and we'll be more than happy to have them as subscribers of HDFC Pension.
Definitely, NPCI website has returns of last 10 years, so people can just view. And
That's correct. Absolutely.
So they can take a choice.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I would just request you, could you share some of the most common mistakes that NPS investors make and how they can avoid them?
The first point, and I think you alluded to this earlier, which is that most people tend to say that this पैसा मेरा कट रहा है, NPS में जा रहा है, वो अपने आप हो जाएगा. You have to take active interest in it. By active interest, I'm not saying that you need to keep looking at the portfolio. You need to make sure that your asset allocation is appropriate.
Absolutely.
Now, you will be shocked to know, Leji, that I have come across so-called people from the financial services industry who are very smart, who are very educated, who are very, very, and probably are advising a lot of other people on investment. When we ask them कि भाई आपके NPS portfolio में allocation क्या है, वो तो मुझे पता नहीं है, वो कुछ जा रहा है, कट के जा रहा है. I think it is first thing is that take interest, right? See whether the asset allocation in your NPS fund is suitable to what you want. I'm not saying equity कम रखो, equity ज़्यादा रखो. That's, as we discussed earlier, it's a matter of
individual risk appetite.
Individual risk appetite. Younger you are, higher should be your allocation to equity. But please take interest, right? Because I see a lot of people after 10 years they say यार मेरा पैसा बना ही नहीं है equity इसमें NPS में. Why are you blaming the vehicle when you have been putting your आपने एक पैर ब्रेक पे लगा रखा है और आप बोल रहे हो गाड़ी नहीं चल रही है, तो गलती किसकी है, right? So you have to make sure that you take interest, and especially for PSU bank employees, given the fact that there is a mandatory contribution that happens. For others, I would say start the journey. There's a very large number of Indians who have not even started the journey of planning for retirement, right? And for them, I would say the message is that start the journey. But for PSU bankers, I would say take interest in this. See where the money is going. Now that the choice of funds, choice of fund managers has been opened up with the effort that you put in, your team has put in, the various other officials have put in, I think this is a time for you to seize the opportunity. Make sure that you see what is asset allocation, what suits you best, which is the fund manager that you think aligns with your philosophy, right? And make sure that you make the right choice and then let it be. Don't keep fiddling with it.
छेड़छाड़ नहीं करनी चाहिए.
छेड़छाड़ करने की जरूरत नहीं, right? Time is on your side. आप कुछ भी करेंगे इसमें पैसा, अगर आप छेड़छाड़ नहीं करेंगे पैसा बनेगा, right? Probability of you making good returns is very high here.
If I go through across the average age group of a public sector bank employee in our country, it is around 35 to 38.
देखिए,
so हर एक के पास 20 साल के ऊपर
22 से 25 साल का टाइम है. So I think they are in very, very good space, and they've got a golden opportunity to continue to maximize the allocation into NPS and enjoy the rewards at the right time.
बिफोर वी जस्ट क्लोज सर,
जी।
एक सवाल जो हमारे सारे पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक एम्प्लॉयज के मन में होगा सर, ये हम आपसे पूछना चाहेंगे कि आज 25 साल में कोई पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक एम्प्लॉय बैंक ज्वाइन करता है, 22-25 साल में बैंक एम्प्लॉय ज्वाइन करता है सर,
जी।
लगभग 60 में रिटायर करता है।
जी।
एंड अगर आज हम किसी भी एवरेज पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक एम्प्लॉय का एज देखें, इट इज टू द ट्यून ऑफ 34 to 38 या 30 to 40 के बीच में हम पकड़ सकते हैं
जी।
सर।
जी।
तो और उनका जो मंथली कंट्रीब्यूशन जा रहा है, अगर वो स्केल 1 में, स्केल 2 में या जो भी बैंडविड्थ में है सर, वहाँ उनका 20,000 से 30,000 रुपए तक का मंथली कंट्रीब्यूशन है, एम्प्लॉयर एम्प्लॉय मिला के। सर हम ये आपसे पूछना चाहेंगे कि अगर कोई एम्प्लॉय आज स्विच करता है फंड और कोई नहीं स्विच करता है, तो उसका कितना नुकसान या कितना जो हम कह सकते हैं कि इम्पैक्ट आएगा, उसके ऊपर अगर आप इफ यू कैन थ्रो सम लाइट ऑन इट।
बहुत अच्छा सवाल है। ऑफ कोर्स द एक्चुअल अमाउंट विल डिपेंड अपॉन व्हाट इज द कंट्रीब्यूशन, व्हाट इज द एग्जैक्ट एज, बट हैविंग सेड दैट आई थिंक ये जो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट सवाल आपने पूछा, क्योंकि क्या होता है कि आपकी जो डिफॉल्ट स्कीम है, उस डिफॉल्ट स्कीम के अंदर आज की तारीख में 15 से 18% की इक्विटी की एलोकेशन है, जिसका मतलब यह है कि अगले 25-30 साल के अंदर उसकी संभावना उसके अंदर रिटर्न की करीब 8.5%, 8-8.5% मेरे हिसाब से इज द मोस्ट ऑप्टिमिस्टिक सिनेरियो दैट वन कैन इमेजिन. While if you have the option to move to let's say 75% equity allocation in the active choice scheme, and if somebody were to choose that, even forget about 75%, मैं कह रहा हूँ कि आप बैलेंस लाइफ साइकिल में भी चले जाएं, right? The probability of you being able to make 25 to 30% more, मान लीजिए अगर आप डिफॉल्ट में रहते हैं तो आप शायद 100 की मान लीजिए जमा पूंजी आपकी मान लीजिए 100 की कॉर्पस जमा होती है, it can be 125 to 135 if you change the asset allocation at this stage. और वो आपको आज करना बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि the moment you do it today, the power of compounding starts from today, right? अगर आप 10 साल बाद करेंगे तो आपने वो जर्नी लूज कर दी, 10 साल की जो पावरफुल जर्नी है कंपाउंडिंग की आपने लूज कर दी. तो 30 to मेरे ख्याल से 25 से 35% की इम्पैक्ट जरूर आएगी, और ये हर कैलकुलेट और हमारी टीम आपके साथ काम कर सकती है टू शोकेस कि भाई अलग अलग लेवल्स पे, अलग अलग कंट्रीब्यूशन लेवल्स पे और अलग अलग एज पे किस तरह का इम्पैक्ट आ सकता है. और ये सारी प्रोजेक्टेड रिटर्न्स है. आई थिंक वी मस्ट बी वेरी क्लियर दैट दीस आर प्रोजेक्टेड रिटर्न्स, बट दीस प्रोजेक्टेड रिटर्न्स हम बहुत एग्रेसिव रिटर्न्स नहीं ले रहे हैं. हम पास्ट रिटर्न्स के हिसाब से हम इसको प्रोजेक्ट कर रहे हैं, और हमारे हिसाब से लॉन्ग टर्म के अंदर ये रिटर्न्स बिल्कुल प्रोबेबिलिटी बहुत अच्छी है कि ये रिटर्न्स बने.
सर इसी कड़ी में एक सवाल जो आई एम श्योर हमारे सारे लिसनर्स के मन में भी होगा सर, एट द एज ऑफ 60, अगर गॉड फॉरबिड तभी जब किसी का 60 एज है और उसका तब मार्केट क्रैश हो गया सर व्हाट विल बी द फेट सर, उसमें व्हाट वुड यू लाइक टू कमेंट ऑन टू दैट?
वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन अगेन नीलेश जी. आई थिंक दिस इज अ फैंटास्टिक क्वेश्चन एंड दिस इज समथिंग दैट बॉदर्स एवरी पर्सन, राइट? आपको सब हर एक को लगता है कि यार 60 की उम्र में जब इक्विटी में अगर मेरा एक्सपोजर ज्यादा हो, 60 की उम्र में जब मैं जाऊं और तब इक्विटी में अगर करेक्शन आ गया तो जब मेरी रिटायरमेंट हो रही है तब मेरा पैसा कम हो जाएगा. दो चीजें मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूँ नीलेश जी. एक तो ये है कि इन एनपीएस आपके पास, अगर आप जैसे आप कह रहे हैं 35 साल की उम्र ऑन एन एवरेज 35 से 40
के आसपास की उम्र
हर एक पब्लिक सेक्टर में, हर एक पब्लिक, तो 20 से 25 साल की उनके पास टाइम जर्नी है फॉर देम टू they have to retirement to get to 60, right? So number one, there are auto choice options जो हमने इसके बारे में बात करी, जहाँ पे allocation to equity will come down when you get closer to retirement. जहाँ पे आपकी allocation to equity में come down to 15, 20, 25%. तो आपका 100 रुपए का अगर मान लीजिए पूरा कॉर्पस है, उसमें सिर्फ 20 या 25% इक्विटी में है, जिसके अंदर वॉलेटाइल अगर हुआ भी तो आपका ओवरऑल पोर्टफोलियो पे नुकसान जो है सिर्फ 4 या 5% का होगा, राइट? सो टू दैट एक्सटेंट यू कैन शील्ड योर पोर्टफोलियो बाय हैविंग smaller allocation to equity when you get closer to retirement, right? And that the auto choice option offers you, and even in active choice you can do that as you get closer to your retirement, reduce your allocation to equity. After 55 start reducing your allocation. In fact I would say 53 के बाद थोड़ा सा कम कर सकते हैं. And as I said earlier also कि भाई जो overall portfolio आप उस पे asset allocation देखिए, ठीक है? The second thing that I would say is that when you invest for the long term, मैं और आपको एक example दूंगा. मान लीजिए आपने 25 साल तक आपने कोई जर्नी ट्रैवर्स करी इक्विटी में इन्वेस्ट करने की, राइट? और मान लीजिए उस 25 साल में आपने कम से कम 12% की कंपाउंडेड रिटर्न आपकी बनी है, मान लीजिए 11-12% की रिटर्न बनी है, विच इज अ वेरी रीजनेबल रिटर्न, राइट? ओवर अ 25 ईयर टाइम होराइजन. इवन इफ देयर इज अ करेक्शन ऑफ 20% एट द टाइम व्हेन यू आर एग्जिटिंग, द एक्चुअल आईआरआर जो आपने जो रिटर्न पूरे लाइफ टाइम में जो 12% की जो आईआरआर बनाई, आपने 12% पर एनम की जो रिटर्न बनाई, वो 11% ही होता है. अच्छा, इतना? हाँ, शील्ड, बिकॉज यू हैव इन्वेस्टेड फॉर अ वेरी लॉन्ग पीरियड ऑफ टाइम.
उसका इम्पैक्ट
राइट,
कितना
उसका इम्पैक्ट, तो करेक्शन का इम्पैक्ट ऑन योर लॉन्ग टर्म रिटर्न, मैं ये नहीं कहता हूँ कि आपकी लॉस नहीं हो रही है, ऑफ कोर्स लॉस हो रही है, ऑफ कोर्स एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम optically you will see that the money has come down, but the return that you would have made would have still been in double digits if you stayed invested in this equity asset class for a longer period of time. That's the key.
सर जैसे आपने कहा कि अगर एट द एज ऑफ 60 जब उसको एग्जिट करना है, 20% करेक्शन आया है मार्केट में, तो सर व्हाट कैन यू सजेस्ट इसमें, और कैसे उसको मतलब रिटर्न्स सेफगार्ड कर सकते हैं सर?
देखिए एनपीएस में एक और बहुत बढ़िया जो उसके अंदर ऑप्शन जो आपके पास है, जो पहले के सुपर एनिमेशन में नहीं होता था। सुपर एनिमेशन में क्या होता है कि 60 की उम्र में आपको निकलना ही पड़ता था। एनपीएस के अंदर एक ऑप्शन है जहाँ पे आप एट द टाइम ऑफ सुपर एनिमेशन चाहें तो आप 75 की उम्र तक आप बरकरार रख सकते हैं उसको, और आप ये भी कर सकते हैं कि 60 की उम्र के बाद आप मान लीजिए कोई कंसल्टिंग वर्क आपने चालू करी है या आपके पास कोई और कैश फ्लोज हैं, आप इन्वेस्ट भी कर सकते हैं 60 की उम्र के बाद भी। और जब आप चाहें, मान लीजिए 65 की उम्र में आपको लगता है कि अच्छा जी अब मार्केट जो, देखिए मार्केट की उतार चढ़ाव is a feature of the market, not a bug. And large corrections in market happens very, very infrequently. अगर आप देखें 30-40% की जो मार्केट करेक्शन होती है वो 10 साल में शायद एक बार होगी, राइट? तो अगर किसी की लक बहुत ही खराब है और उस टाइम पे जब वो रिटायर हो रहा है तभी जाके 30-40%, then there is an option for the person to stay invested till such time that they feel they are out of the woods, the market is out of the woods, and they're able to. And दूसरी और मैं बात बताना चाहता हूँ आपको कि 60 की उम्र जैसे जैसे आप ओल्डर होते जाते हैं आपकी एन्युटी की रेट बेहतर होती जाती है, राइट? सो इफ यू डेफर योर, इट्स कॉल्ड डेफरमेंट, इफ यू डेफर योर superannuation or exiting from the NPS, you are actually with every passing year the rate of return that you get on annuity also improves, right? So that's the other advantage.
So up to the age of 75
you can hold on to, you can actually invest up to the age of 70 and you can hold on to the NPS account till the age of 75, and at the age of 75 you exit the product. In fact, there is a proposal to actually extend that 75 to 85 now. वो भी एक proposal है जो अभी consideration में है, तो देखते हैं वो कैसे होता है. But all this flexibility is available.
Finally, if you could offer one golden tip to NPS investors, something simple yet timeless, sir, what would it be?
So I would say again, I would go back to the same conversation that we had around equity and why it is important for you to understand that equity is risky in the short term and the risk of volatility goes away in the long term, right? This is a very important home truth that people need to remember, right? And इसमें एक चीज मैं कई बार सुनता हूँ कि यार मेरा रिटायरमेंट पोर्टफोलियो ना, मैं I will manage it very safely. That's a big myth, right? I mean, why should you, just because this money is for your retirement, which is 25 years away, why will you manage it conservatively? You should actually manage it very aggressively, right? So as far as the audience that we are talking to, which is essentially PSU bankers, my advice would be to essentially make sure that you take the right asset allocation call, because आपके केस में the PSU bank has done its bit of making sure that there's an allocation that is going. So that decision has been taken for you, right? I think your task as a PSU employee is to make sure, the bank employee is to make sure that making the right asset allocation call.
Sir.
If I may add just one point,
sir.
देखिए there are various other things that can happen in, जैसे NPS वात्सल्य करके एक product है which is meant for, so NPS is a product is now from cradle to grave. From the age of 0 you can actually open a NPS वात्सल्य. So I would encourage your listeners to also evaluate उनके बच्चों के नाम पे, कितनी भी उम्र हो, 18 के नीचे जो भी उम्र हो, get them started on this journey. NPS वात्सल्य अगर 5 साल 10 साल जो भी उम्र है, आप मानेंगे नहीं नीलेश जी, if you are able to start this journey of, and it can be 50,000 rupees a year, 20,000 rupees a year, जो मर्जी शुरुआत करिए, right? Pump prime when at the time of 18, when the child attains majority, you move it into NPS. That is it's like a starting point that is going to be so large for the child that they will make unimaginable amount of money if they continue on the journey till their retirement. So NPS Vatsalya is another thing that I would strongly urge your audience to consider for their children, for their children's well-being. It's a brilliant product, and I think they must take advantage of it.
Definitely, sir. Thank you very much for giving this golden tip to all our listeners कि उनको कैसे कहाँ इन्वेस्ट करना है as per their age profile, the thumb rules and all. Sir, that's a very wonderful way to conclude, sir. And really, it was a privilege having you on this podcast. And I would just once again thank the entire team, especially Iyer sir, for giving his time today and joining us today and sharing his valuable insights. Your clarity on the evolving NPS landscape and HDFC pension funds perspective has truly been enlightening, sir. And to our listeners, remember, retirement planning isn't about your age, it's about your foresight. The earlier you start, like you very rightly said, the earlier you start, the stronger is your foundation for financial freedom. Until next time, we are signing off. Stay informed, stay invested, and stay secure. Thank you.
Thank you.